The locket hit the sidewalk with a sound so small, nobody should have heard it. But Naomi did. She was walking home from her shift at the hospital laundry. Third one that week, Tuesday through Thursday, 5 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, when she saw it happen. The woman ahead of her stepped off the curb toward a waiting town car, and something slipped from the fold of her coat. A small gold oval, spinning once on the wet concrete before settling into the gap between the sidewalk and the gutter. The woman didn't notice. The driver already had the door open, a hand on her elbow, a murmur about the cold. "Ma'am," Naomi called. "Excuse me, ma'am," but the door shut. The car rolled forward, smooth and silent, and pulled into the gray November afternoon like it had never been there at all. Naomi stood still for a moment, rain coming down fine as mist, the street empty except for the hiss of passing tires. She looked down at the locket on the ground, then at the street where the car had been. Then she crouched, picked it up, and held it in her palm. It was old. Real gold, not plated. She could tell from the weight of it, the surface worn soft from years of being touched. A tiny clasp on the side still holding, and on the front engraved in a script so fine it was barely visible. The initials E.M. Naomi turned it over. On the back, a date, 1974. She stood there on Dundas Street in the November rain with someone else's 50-year-old locket in her hand, and the car was already 3 blocks away. She could have set it on a ledge, left it for someone else to deal with. She was tired, the real kind of tired that lives in your feet and your lower back and behind your eyes. She still had groceries to pick up. Her daughter Kezia was home from school sick. The rent was due on Friday and she was $60 short. She had her own problems. She had so many of her own problems. But Naomi looked at that date, 1974, and something in her chest wouldn't let her put it down. She opened it. Inside, on the left, a photograph so small it was barely a thumbnail. A man and a woman, young, laughing at something outside the frame. The woman was wearing a dress with a white collar. The man had his arm around her shoulders like he never planned to let go. On the right, a lock of hair, dark brown, tied with a thread so fine it had nearly dissolved with age. Naomi closed it carefully. "Okay," she said quietly, to no one. To the rain, to the decision she was apparently already making. She found the ID card by shaking out the locket's small interior pocket, a habit from years of working admissions, always checking for the card nobody remembered to put back. It wasn't an ID card. It was a folded slip of paper, soft at the creases, the ink faded to a pale blue, an address in Rosedale, and a name, Margaret Ellery Finch. Naomi looked at the address. Rosedale was 40 minutes by transit, minimum, probably longer in this weather. She had groceries to pick up. Kezia was waiting. The $60 wasn't going to appear from nowhere. She looked at the locket again, the date, 1974. She got on the streetcar going east. Let's back up a little. Because to understand what Naomi did that afternoon, you need to understand who Naomi was, and more than that, who she was trying to be. Naomi Osiquordy was 43 years old. She had moved to Toronto from Accra 18 years earlier, with a nursing certification, a single suitcase, and the absolute certainty that she was going to build something good. She'd spent 4 of those years trying to get her credentials recognized in Canada, a process so slow and grinding that more than once she'd sat in the kitchen at midnight doing math that didn't add up and wondering if she'd made the wrong choice. She hadn't quit. That was the thing about Naomi. She didn't quit. She worked the hospital laundry while she completed the bridging program. She worked evenings at a pharmacy counter while she studied for her assessments. She raised Kezia mostly alone after her husband Bernard passed, a quiet man, a good man, who died of a stroke at 41 and left behind a daughter, who still slept with a photo of him under her pillow, and a wife who never talked about how much she missed him, because there was always something more urgent to deal with. Naomi had finally gotten her registration 3 years ago. She was working her way back through the system, picking up shifts where she could get them, building a record. The laundry job was temporary. Everything was temporary. She kept telling herself that. Her apartment was small, 2 bedrooms because Kezia needed her own space to study, and Naomi had decided a long time ago that the one thing she would not compromise on was her daughter's ability to focus. The kitchen window looked out at a brick wall. The radiator knocked all winter. The super had been promising to fix the lock on the front entrance since September. But there was a photo on the fridge. Kezia at convocation, not hers. She was only 15, but her school's science fair. where she'd won first place for a project on water filtration in sub-Saharan communities. She was holding the ribbon and squinting into the sun and grinning so wide her whole face was the grin. Naomi had put it there so she'd see it every morning. She didn't have a lot, but she was very clear about what she was working toward. Now here she was, on a streetcar heading to Rosedale in the November rain, holding a stranger's locket, $60 short on rent, and Kezia at home with a fever. She'd texted the neighbor, Mrs. Papadopoulos, to check in. She'd looked up the address. She'd done the mental calculation on whether the grocery store would still be open on her way back. She was doing the right thing. She just wished it was a little less inconvenient. The streetcar let her off at the top of the hill, and she walked the rest of the way. The houses in Rosedale were the kind that don't announce themselves. They just exist, quiet and certain, set back from the street behind old maples that were bare now, skeletal against the low-gray sky. The address on the paper led her to a red brick house, 3 stories, with black shutters and a lamp burning warm above the front door. Naomi stood at the gate for a moment. Her coat was damp. Her shoes were wet. She was aware, standing here, of how she must look. A middle-aged black woman in a hospital laundry uniform at the door of a house like this on a Tuesday afternoon. She buzzed anyway. A pause. Then a voice through the intercom. A woman's voice, older, clipped. "Yes? Good afternoon. My name is Naomi Osiquarti. A woman dropped something on Dundas Street about an hour ago. I think it was a gold locket. I found your address inside and I wanted to return it." Another pause. Longer. "Please come through." The gate clicked open. The woman who opened the door was perhaps 70, straight-backed, wearing gray trousers and a cream blouse. Silver hair pinned neatly, the face of someone who had spent a long time making decisions and expected them to be followed. She looked at Naomi, then at Naomi's hand. Her expression changed in a way that was hard to describe. Not quite collapse, not quite relief, something between the two that passed very quickly before she got it under control. "May I?" she said. Naomi held out the locket. The woman took it, held it in both hands, closed her eyes for just a moment. When she opened them, she said, "Please come in." Her name, she said, was Harriet. She was Margaret Ellery Finch's personal assistant of 22 years. Mrs. Ellery Finch was in a meeting and would be down shortly. Would Naomi like tea? Naomi said yes to the tea, mostly because she was cold and her feet hurt, and she was shown into a sitting room at the front of the house. Pale walls, a fireplace with a real fire in it, books along one wall and framed photographs along another. She stood there, still in her coat because Harriet had moved away before she could offer to take it, and she looked at the photographs. One of them stopped her. It was a black and white photograph, larger than the others, hung at eye level. A building, old, low brick, with a sign above the door, OC Community Kitchen. Below the sign, a man in an apron stood with his arms crossed, smiling at the camera. Behind him, through the open door, she could make out long tables set for a meal. The man in the photograph was her father. Naomi didn't move, couldn't for a moment. She'd seen that photograph before, a smaller version of it, printed on paper that had gone soft at the corners, in a box in the back of her closet. Her father, Kwaku Osiquarti, who had run a community kitchen in their neighborhood in Accra for 30 years, who had fed anyone who came to the door and never once asked them to prove they deserved it, who had died a decade ago, having never owned more than he needed. But this photograph was different. This one was framed in silver and hanging on the wall of a house in Rosedale, Toronto. Her father had never been to Canada. "You have questions?" Naomi turned. A woman had entered the room behind her without a sound. She was perhaps 75, small, carefully dressed, with pale blue eyes that were very direct and currently fixed on Naomi's face with an attention that felt like being read. This was Margaret Ellery Finch. "I'm sorry," Naomi said. "I was looking at the photograph. That's my father." Margaret Ellery Finch looked at her for a long moment. "I know," she said. Naomi's breath caught. "I'm sorry, I know who he is." The old woman moved slowly to the chair by the fireplace and sat. She gestured to the chair across from her. "Please, sit down. There are things I should have told someone a very long time ago." Naomi sat. "I was 26 years old," Margaret began, "and I was very sick. I had been traveling. I worked for an international development organization. This was 1974. I was stationed in West Africa. I became ill in Accra, seriously ill. I had no local contacts who could help. My organization was in Dakar. I spoke almost no Twi." She paused. I was terrified. I was very far from home and I did not have anyone. She looked at the photograph. A young man found me on the street, barely older than a boy, 20, perhaps 21. He brought me to his family's home. His mother and his aunt nursed me for 11 days. When I was well enough, he arranged everything to get me to the hospital. He fed me, clothed me, translated for me. She was quiet a moment. He would not take a cent. Every time I tried, he laughed and said there was always more food. Naomi felt something open in her chest. That was my father, she said. It was not a question. His name was Kwiku. He told me when I left, I pressed money into his hand more than I'd ever given anyone, because I had nothing else to give. He refused it. A faint smile. He said, keep it, pass it on when someone else needs it more. And he gave me something instead. She held up the locket. He had it made here, a small workshop near his mother's house. He said it was so. I would remember that there are still good people, and that 1974 was the year I learned to believe it. Naomi could not speak. I spent years trying to find him again, Margaret continued. The organization moved me 3 times in 2 years. By the time I was back in a position to look, I only had a first name and a neighborhood. I never stopped. But Accra is a big city, and the years go. She looked at Naomi steadily. And then this afternoon on Dundas Street, I dropped a 50-year-old locket, and a woman picked it up and brought it to my door. And when I came downstairs just now and Harriet told me your name, Ose Quarty, I thought perhaps I was imagining things. Naomi realized her hands were shaking. She pressed them together in her lap. He never told us about you, she said softly. He didn't. He never talked about specific people. He just said you help who's in front of you. That's all. You help who's in front of you and you don't keep a record. Margaret's eyes were bright. Yes, she said. That sounds exactly right. They sat by the fire for a long time. Harriet brought the tea. Outside, the November rain kept coming down, slow and fine against the windows. Naomi told Margaret about her father, about the kitchen in Accra, the long tables, the neighbors who came every evening, about how he'd died with more friends than possessions, and how his funeral had lasted 3 days, because the line of people wanting to pay respects stretched around the block twice. About the photograph in her closet, the same one on this wall, taken by a journalist who'd done a piece on community kitchen in the city in the late 90s. Margaret listened to all of it without interrupting. When Naomi finished, the old woman was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "And you, tell me about you." So Naomi did. She didn't know why. She didn't usually talk about herself. But there was something about the fire, the rain, the strangeness of the afternoon, the way Margaret Ellery Finch listened with her whole attention. Naomi told her about the 18 years in Toronto, the bridging program, Bernard, Kezia and the science fair ribbon, the $60 short on rent that she was trying not to think about, the laundry shifts and the nursing registration and the slow, grinding, stubborn work of building something from not much. She stopped herself. "I'm sorry, you didn't ask for all of that." "I did ask," Margaret said simply, "and I want to understand." There was a pause. Naomi looked at the fire. "You must let me do something," Margaret said. "No, please." Naomi shook her head. "I didn't come here for that. I came because it was a 50-year-old locket and someone was going to miss it. That's all. I know that's all." Margaret said, "That is precisely the point." She was quiet a moment. "I am a woman who has thought about your father for 50 years, about what he gave me in 11 days, about what I would say if I ever found him and what I would do. I had a whole plan, you see, whenever I found him." She looked at the locket in her hand. "He's gone, and here you are, and I would like very much, if you'll allow me, to say thank you to someone who can actually hear it." Naomi looked at her. "What would that mean?" "It would mean that your daughter's education is handled, from here until university, whatever she needs. It would mean that your nursing career has a foundation behind it, not just a hope. It would mean that the rent on Friday is not something you lie awake about." Margaret held her gaze. "It would mean that your father's kindness did not disappear into the world without an answer." Naomi couldn't speak for a moment. She felt the tightness in her throat that she'd learned, a long time ago, not to let through. "I can't accept that," she said finally. "You can," Margaret said, "because this is not charity. Please hear me. This is a debt 50 years old. Your father saved my life. I'm not speaking metaphorically. I was seriously ill, alone, in a city where I knew no one. He saved my life and asked for nothing and gave me everything I needed. What I built after that, I built on the foundation of believing that people can be genuinely good, That belief came from him. She set the locket on the arm of her chair. I have carried this locket for 50 years as a reminder of what I owe. Today a woman picked it up off the sidewalk in the rain and brought it 40 minutes across the city because it was the right thing to do. If that's not Kweku Osekorti's daughter, I don't know what is. Naomi pressed her hands together, looked at the fire, looked at the photograph on the wall, her father in his apron, smiling at the camera, the open door behind him, the long table set and waiting. She thought about Kezia at home with a fever. She thought about the brochure for the nursing residency program she'd been afraid to apply for because the timing would mean less income for 8 months, and she didn't see how to make the math work. She thought about the rent on Friday, and she thought about what her father always said when she asked him how he decided who to help. You help who's in front of you, that's all. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, thank you. Margaret nodded once. Thank your father. What happened next came fast, the way things do when a door that's been locked a long time finally opens. Margaret called her solicitor that evening. By Thursday, a trust had been established in Kezia's name, not a token amount, but a real one, enough to cover whatever path she chose, wherever it led. Margaret had also, it emerged, been a significant donor to the hospital foundation for 2 decades, and she made a phone call the following morning that opened a door Naomi hadn't known existed. A nursing residency position, a good one, with full salary and a 2-year pathway to a senior role. I didn't get you the job, Margaret said clearly when she told Naomi. Your credentials got you the job. I just made certain the right person saw your file. Naomi believed her, mostly. There was one more thing, and it was the one that undid her completely. Margaret took her, on a cold Saturday morning in early December, to a building on Davenport Road. A former bakery, empty now, the front windows whitewashed, a for lease sign in the window. I've been thinking, Margaret said, standing on the sidewalk with her hands in her coat pockets, looking at the building, about what your father did, the kitchen, the long tables, the open door. She turned to look at Naomi. Toronto has community kitchens, but not enough, and this neighborhood is changing in ways that are leaving people behind. A pause. I would like to start a foundation, in Kweku's name, something real, not a letterhead, an actual place. Hot meals, yes, but also support services. A place that stays open late for people who need somewhere to be. She looked back at the building. I would like your help to build it. Not because you're his daughter, because you've spent 18 years in this city understanding who gets left out and why. She glanced at Naomi. And because I think he'd want his name on something you had a hand in. Naomi stood on Davenport Road in the cold and looked at the whitewashed windows and the empty space behind them and could not find a single word. The sign above the door when they had it made read, Kweku's. Just that. No explanation. The name of a man who helped who was in front of him and didn't keep a record. It opened in February, on the coldest week of the year. The neighborhood showed up, more people than anyone expected, crowding the doorway, spilling onto the sidewalk. Kids from the shelter 2 streets over, and elderly residents from the apartment building on the corner, and families Naomi recognized from the laundry shift because she'd seen them in the hospital system, navigating things people shouldn't have to navigate alone. Kezia was there. She stood beside her mother in the kitchen for the first hour, assembling plates, and every few minutes she'd look around at the room, and her face would do something, not quite crying, not quite smiling, somewhere between them that was its own thing. At one point she said, quietly, Did you know about Grandpa and her? No, Naomi said. He never told anyone. Kezia was quiet a moment. He just did it and let it go. That's exactly what he did. On the wall by the serving counter they hung the photograph. Kweku Osekorti in his apron, standing outside the kitchen in Accra, smiling at whoever was behind the camera. Beside it, in simple black type on white paper, the words he used to say, You help who's in front of you, that's all. Margaret came in on opening day and stood in the room for a long time, holding a cup of coffee, watching. At some point, she found Naomi and said simply, There he is! She looked at the photograph, after 50 years. People talked about it, the way people talk about things in a city this size, meaning more than you'd expect and less than the story deserved. A local paper ran a piece. Someone put a short video online that had a lot of shares for about a week. There were comments, hundreds of them, saying things like, This is why I haven't given up on people yet, and my father was the same, always the bigger half, and I don't know why I'm crying at my desk right now, but here we are. But the real story wasn't in the comment. It was in the room every evening when the doors opened at 5. Naomi was there on a Tuesday night in March, late, after most of the volunteers had gone home. She was wiping down the counter when she noticed the door. Someone was standing outside. Not knocking, not buzzing, just standing. A girl, maybe 16, in a thin jacket, her face pressed slightly toward the warm light inside the window. Not quite coming in. Too unsure, Naomi had seen this before. Not here, but in the hospital. The way someone stands at the edge of asking for help, trying to calculate whether they're allowed. She walked to the door and opened it. Cold air came in. The girl, startled, took half a step back. "Hey," Naomi said. Nothing more than that. Just, "Hey." The girl looked at her. I don't have. Come in," Naomi said. "It's cold out here." The girl came in slowly, the way a person enters a space they're not sure is for them. Naomi sat her down at the counter and made her a plate. Not a small one, not a polite one, a real one, and sat across from her while she ate and didn't ask hard questions. Just kept her company. Let the warmth of the room do its work. When the girl was done, and her shoulders had come down from around her ears, and her hands had stopped being fists, Naomi reached into her pocket. She brought out a small card, plain white, nothing on it but the name Kwiku's and a phone number. "You can come back," Naomi said. "Any night. You don't need anything to get in the door. You don't need money, you don't need a reason, you don't need to explain yourself." She set the card in the girl's hand. "You just come back." The girl looked at it, then up at Naomi. "Why?" Naomi thought of her father in his apron, of Margaret on a street in Accra in 1974, sick and alone and far from home, of a Locket hitting a sidewalk on Dundas Street and a decision made in the rain. "Because someone did it for someone I loved," she said. "So now I do it." She smiled. "One day you'll understand, and maybe you'll do it too." The girl tucked the card into her jacket pocket. She looked at the photograph on the wall, Kweku in his apron, the open door behind him, the long tables. And for a moment she just looked at it, the way you look at something that means something you don't have words for yet. Then she said thank you, very quietly, and went back out into the cold. Naomi stood at the door and watched her go. Then she looked up at her father's photograph. He was smiling. He was always smiling in that photograph, as if he already knew how the story would go, as if he'd always known that kindness, real kindness, doesn't end when the person who gave it walks away. It travels. It changes shape. It waits in a locket for 50 years and shows up on a Tuesday afternoon in the rain, and then it starts again. So here's the thing this story keeps asking. Naomi could have left that locket on the ledge. She was tired. She was $60 short. She had a sick kid at home and groceries to pick up, and her own problems stretching in every direction. Nobody would have blamed her. Nobody would have known. But she picked it up, and she got on the streetcar, and she went 40 minutes across the city in the rain to put something back where it belonged. One small, quiet choice that no one was watching her make. If you were standing on Dundas Street in the rain, what would you have done? Would you have kept walking, or would you have picked it up? Tell us honestly. We read every single comment. And if this story stayed with you even a little, do something small right now. Hit like, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to Velvet Honor so you don't miss what's coming next. Because the world already has enough people walking past. Let's be the ones who stop.